The grave of one of Mexico's most feared cartel bosses has ignited a national storm. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known worldwide as El Mencho, leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, was finally laid to rest, but instead of bringing closure, his burial has sparked outrage, conspiracy theories, and even threats of grave robbery. Within days, furious citizens reportedly vandalized the tomb, tore apart flowers, smashed crosses, and publicly humiliated the site. For many, the message was clear: a man responsible for thousands of deaths should never be honored in death. But the controversy goes far deeper. Rumors are spreading that the body inside the coffin may not even be El Mencho. Some sources claim rival cartels are plotting to steal the coffin itself, while others suggest the burial may have been a carefully staged deception. Authorities are reportedly considering drastic measures, including closing the cemetery and exhuming other cartel leaders buried nearby, highlighting the extreme lengths the government is willing to go to control this crisis. What started as a funeral has turned into a national debate about justice, narco culture, and the dangerous legacy of Mexico's most powerful cartels. Every detail, from the golden coffin to heavily armed guards and restricted access, adds fuel to the fire of speculation. So the question remains, was El Mencho really buried there? Or is the world being shown only what the cartel wants us to see? Backhand index pointing down. Comment your theory. Was the body really there, or is this the biggest cartel deception in recent history? Stay with us as we unveil the shocking truth. Firstly, a golden coffin, 5 truckloads of anonymous flowers, and an army standing guard over a grave that Mexico doesn't know what to do with. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, the most feared cartel boss of the modern era, was buried on March 2, 2026 in Zapopan, Guadalajara. And instead of bringing closure, it lit a fuse. Because within days of that burial, citizens were tearing apart the flowers, smashing crosses, and urinating on the tomb. Rival cartels were reportedly circling the cemetery, and the Mexican government began drafting policies that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. This is not just the story of a dead cartel boss. This is the story of what happens to a country when it finally buries its worst nightmare and realizes the nightmare isn't over. On Monday, March 2nd, a white hearse pulled into the Recinto de la Paz Cemetery in Zapopan, surrounded by soldiers, National Guard units, and state police. Inside was a golden coffin, shining, extravagant, unmissable. 5 trucks had been required just to transport the floral arrangements. Hundreds of wreaths arrived at the funeral home without names attached. Almost all sent anonymously. Some included the image of a rooster. Some bore the initials CJNG. One card read, simply, "From a family that will always be grateful." About 8 people dressed in black accompanied the procession, faces covered, dark glasses on. A banda group played Mexican regional music, including the traditional song, El Muchacho Alegra, the happy boy, as the coffin was carried inside. The ceremony lasted roughly an hour. And then, El Mencho was lowered into a simple ground-level grave, modest by narco standards, especially compared to the towering mausoleums that mark the resting places of cartel legends in Culiacán, N. But it didn't matter. The gold coffin, the CJNG flowers, the guarded ceremony for millions of Mexicans watching, it felt like a public honor paid to a man who had no right to receive one. The reaction was immediate and visceral. In Guadalajara, families of the disappeared gathered at the roundabout of the Disappeared, a city landmark renamed by victims' families to highlight the disappearance crisis. Just days earlier, those streets had been empty during the cartel retaliatory violence that followed El Mencho's death. Over 70 people were killed across 20 states in coordinated attacks. Vehicles were set on fire. Roads were blocked. Businesses were destroyed. And while all of that was happening, while grieving families were still counting their dead, El Mencho was being put to rest with gold and banda music. Citizens began arriving at the cemetery not to mourn, but to destroy. Flowers were ripped apart. Crosses were broken. People urinated on the tomb in full view of cameras. Social media exploded. Families of the missing flooded comment sections with the same message. Their loved ones lay in unmarked graves across the desert dumped in what survivors describe as extermination sites while the man responsible for so much of that horror had a known grave, guarded and decorated. Mexico officially lists over 130,000 missing people. Many are believed to be victims of organized crime. Search collectives like the Guerreros Buscadores representing more than 400 families regularly uncover human remains in states of decomposition and torture. Bodies shot, hanged, or killed with bladed weapons still inside them. That is the backdrop against which El Mencho received a golden coffin. For many Mexicans, the grave didn't just represent a dead cartel boss. It represented an open wound that the country didn't know how to close. Is El Mencho really in that coffin? Now here's where it gets darker. Despite the death certificate, despite the autopsy, despite the Attorney General's statement confirming that DNA tests verified blood ties between the body and the family members who claimed it the conspiracy theories have not stopped. And to understand why, you need to know the history. The Knights Templars leader, Nazario Moreno, was officially killed in 2010. He showed up again in 2014 and had to be killed a second time. Heriberto Lozcano, head of the feared Zetas cartel, was killed in 2012 and his body was stolen by cartel associates before an autopsy could be completed. The mystery of his remains has never been fully resolved. That history of faked deaths, stolen bodies, and convenient disappearances is deeply embedded in Mexico's narco culture. And El Mencho's burial gave conspiracy theorists everything they needed to run with it. No public viewing of the body, no release of photographs confirming the corpse's identity, a ceremony deliberately shrouded in secrecy. Online, theories spread fast. Some claimed the government staged the death to avoid cartel retaliation. Others said the coffin contained a decoy. Families of cartel victims publicly demanded forensic confirmation and an open identification process. The government pushed back. DNA tests. A death certificate obtained by the Associated Press. The signatures of medical examiners. Bullet wounds documented in the official record. But in a country where trust in institutions has been eroded by decades of corruption and impunity official documents don't always close the case. The grave as a target. While the public debated whether El Mencho was really dead, security officials were worried about something else entirely. The grave becoming a battleground. Intelligence reports suggested that rival criminal organizations were considering attempts to steal the coffin from the Recinto de la Paz Cemetary. The motive wasn't purely financial though rumors of gold, jewelry, and valuables buried with the body were circulating. The real prize would be symbolic. In Mexico's cartel world, humiliating a fallen enemy can be as powerful as defeating him in battle. Stealing the body of the CJNG's founder would send a message that the cartel's era of dominance was truly finished, that not even death provided protection. The cemetery itself added to the tension. The Recinto de la Paz sits near a military installation and roughly 5 kilometers from the Estadio Akron, one of the venues for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Reporters visiting the site described individuals positioned at the entrances, watching and recording everyone who approached the grave. In cartel language, these are halcones lookouts responsible for tracking outsiders and alerting cells to law enforcement or rival activity. Their presence confirmed what authorities already suspected: the grave was not an isolated burial site. It was still connected to an active network. Federal forces, the National Guard, state police, and military units all deployed to monitor the area. The cemetery had transformed from a place of mourning into something resembling a military perimeter. The government's radical response. The scale of the controversy forced the Mexican government into unprecedented territory. Officials began openly discussing a policy that would have seemed extreme just months earlier, exhuming the bodies of cartel leaders from cemeteries that have become gathering points for organized crime, and relocating them to undisclosed locations under state supervision. A second proposal went even further. Going forward, any major drug trafficker killed in a government operation could be subject to mandatory cremation eliminating the possibility of a grave becoming a shrine, a symbol, or a staging ground for violence. The goal, as officials framed it, was simple: break the mythology. Remove the physical sites that allow narco culture to transform criminal legacies into legends. Critics raised immediate objections: legal, ethical, and practical. Interfering with burial rites is a complex legal matter in Mexico. Family members of even violent criminals retain certain rights under the law. And some experts warned that forced cremation or relocation might actually amplify the mythology it was meant to destroy, creating martyrs rather than erasing them. But the debate itself was significant. Mexico, for the first time in years, was having a national conversation about whether the cultural legacy of cartel leaders should be allowed to exist in a physical, visitable form. That conversation started with a golden coffin in Zapopan. What happens to the CJNG now? With the grave secured and the debate ongoing, the bigger question for analysts wasn't about a cemetery. It was about what comes next for the most powerful cartel in Mexico. Mexico's Secretary of Security, Omar Garca Harfuch, confirmed what intelligence agencies had already suspected. El Mencho's death had significantly weakened the CJNG's central command structure. But weakening is not the same as destroying. The CJNG was not built on a traditional pyramid model. According to researchers at King's College London, the cartel operated more like a franchise network, with profits distributed across many locations and groups simultaneously, rather than flowing through a single financial center. That model made it resilient in ways that more centralized organizations were not. Now, with the center gone, that resilience faces a new test. Internal power struggles are reportedly already emerging between factions. Multiple potential successors are being monitored by authorities. And history suggests what comes next: fragmentation. Smaller factions competing for territory. Violence not decreasing, but becoming less predictable and more scattered. The pattern has played out before, after the Sinaloa cartel's disruptions, after the Zetas fractured, after the Beltra en Leyva organization collapsed. Large cartels rarely disappear. They splinter. And the splinters bleed. So here is where Mexico stands today. The most wanted man in the country is dead, confirmed by DNA, documented by an official death certificate, buried in a golden coffin in a Zapopan cemetery. The cartel he built over 15 years is fracturing under the weight of his absence. The government is drafting policies it never considered before. And the families of 130,000 missing people are left asking why a criminal's grave is easier to find than the remains of their children. The vandalized tomb. The conspiracy theories. The rival cartels circling like vultures. The government's radical proposals. All of it points to something bigger than one burial. Mexico is trying to decide what it means to end an era. And the world is watching. If you made it this far, drop a comment. Do you believe El Mencho is really in that coffin? And don't forget to subscribe. This story is far from over.